Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. We are delighted to welcome all of you here to the Furlough Call, and thank you so much for coming, for so many of our students and faculty and staff colleagues, and certainly our Geneva neighbors. We warmly welcome you here to the President's Forum. We convene today 47 days from the election, and we begin a President's Forum series focused on many aspects of the upcoming election. In my judgment, no one better to really help us think through the federal, state, battleground states, governor's races than our guest, Amy Walter. In advance of bringing her into this conversation, I've asked our great student leaders, Kelly and Jasmine from HWS Votes, to give an overview of this important student effort. They have a table out front about registration and absentee work, and they can give a paid political announcement on behalf of, I paid for this message, but thank you to Kelly and Jasmine and others for your service. Come on up.
Hi everyone, I'm Kelly.
And I'm Jasmine.
And we are co-civic leaders of HWS Votes, which is our nonpartisan voting coalition here on campus. You probably saw us on the way in. We will be tabling throughout this event and after this event. Please come talk to us if you have any questions about registering to vote or requesting an absentee ballot. You can also take the pledge to vote, which increases your chances on voting later down the line.
We're also hosting a number of events this year. We're hosting a lot of course visits, so if you're a faculty member and you'd like to sign up, you're going to come to your class and talk about these things. We're also hosting a lot of watch parties, so we hosted the debate screening. We had 200 people come. We're hoping to have more. Yeah, we're hoping to have even more for the vice presidential debate in October 1st. We're also hosting the screening of the election night as results start coming in on November 5th. We're also hosting a screening of the documentary of Congressman John Lewis on September 27th at the Smith Opera House. We're really excited about that, and we're partnering with the Geneva League of Women Voters. So there's a lot of exciting things happening this semester.
Awesome. Yeah. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm also joined here with our colleague in the politics department, Professor Dwayne Lucas, who we should give it up for Professor Lucas. Professor Lucas and I are co-teaching a course on the election. And so we met today, every Tuesday and Thursday, and we have a great group of students, many of whom are here, who really span the spectrum politically, and we've been engaging in really productive and interesting conversations along the way. So thank you, Professor Lucas, for joining us. But in introducing our guest, I thought it would be great to begin the series with Amy Walters, known to so many of you. She's the publisher and editor-in-chief of the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter, and she's frequently recognized, voted one of Washington's most powerful women. She has a long history with the Cook Political Report as the go-to source of really nonpartisan, accurate analysis of elections at a time where we're all searching for information and background. It is admittedly a deep dive for those of us who are political junkies. We get kind of trending races and predictions. But she is a regular guest of the PBS NewsHour. Many of you, I'm sure, watch her Politics Mondays segments, NBC's Meet the Press, CNN, Fox News. She's a regular and sought-after contributor for her very perceptive, well-earned reputation for her news analysis. She knows small liberal arts institutions. She herself is a summa cum laude graduate of Colby College and serves on their board of trustees. So when we were chatting about coming to this event, she would have loved to have been here in the upstate New York and as a trustee of a small liberal arts campus, but understanding that we are 47 days away from the election. you can appreciate she is one of the most busy people in Washington. To give you some perspective on the Cook Political Report, it is, the New York Times said, viewed by both political parties as just authoritative. Media Bias, that does the fact checks, wrote, overall, we rate the Cook Political Report least bias based on a long track record of calling races based on known data. We also rate them high for factual reporting due to properly sourcing and a clean fact check record. So, trusted across the political spectrum, accurate for their reporting. And so, Amy will begin these President's Forums on the elections. I invite you to join us on October 17th, where we'll have conservative writer and talk show host and Washington Post columnist Hugh Hewitt, the co-founder of Black Voters Matter, Latasha Brown, and then later on October 23rd, CNN's chief national correspondent, John King. So our website will keep up with some other guests. We're in the process of scheduling, but an opportunity to really engage in political conversations. Next week, we will also have a President's Forum across the street at the Scanlink Center, Vandervoort's room, on Tuesday at 7 p.m., looking at 50 years of global education here at Hobart and William Smith, a pride point for our curriculum, for student experience. So we'll reflect on that 50 years next Tuesday, and we hope you can join us for that. So with that, Dwayne, thank you for coming. But let's bring Amy into this conversation. Amy, welcome to Geneva, New York. Welcome to Hobart and William Smith. This is an official Zoom call because I get to say you're on mute. Well, let's do a little test here. Amy, why don't you, let's welcome you to Hobart and William Smith to Geneva, New York. Woo! Let's see if we can hear you, Amy.
Okay, how about this?
It's not bad.
Is this working? Is it okay?
Yeah. It's good.
All right. All right.
See? They couldn't do this at Colby College.
I'll make sure to mention this. We can maybe do this for our next meeting.
Yes.
I'll have you call in like this.
Well, I'm actually, I'm going to mention at our next board meeting for an increase in our technology budget. We need to help Roy out. Anyway, Amy, we are thrilled you're here. You are uniquely sort of prepared to reflect on the campaign. I would say, as I said to the audience here, your background is a sterling one in Washington. When I was at the Kennedy School and hosted new members of Congress, bipartisan group, the newly elected members of Congress, I would always go to Amy Walter to come to kick it off. There was no one better to speak about every district. She knew every congressional district race and result to welcome the new members of Congress. So, Amy, thanks for joining us.
You are so welcome. I'm really happy to be here.
So let's just jump right in. We have a good group here. I'm joined also by my faculty colleague, Professor Dwayne Lucas. We are co-conspirators in a class on politics and the elections. But I think the whole room would want to get your perspective with 47 days remaining of the state of the race, right? The presidential race. I noted your recent piece that Vice President Harris has turned the debate into a referendum on Trump. That was a bit ago. So let's just start at a 30,000-foot level and walk us through your analysis of at least the presidential race.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do it. And yes, I am sorry not to be there. I do love nothing more than spending time on a small liberal arts college campus, but it's obviously a teeny bit crazy right now, the idea of being able to to travel anywhere for the next 4 weeks here, or 5 weeks. So here's how I look at this from that 30,000 foot view, Mark, which is to say that Harris's entry into this race reset it, but it didn't restructure it. And by that, I mean, you had a case, if we're going to think about this maybe in a sports analogy, of the red team was in the red zone, right? They were 5 yards from the end zone. They had the full team on the field, and their team was energized and excited. The blue team didn't have everybody on the field because the team wasn't particularly engaged or excited. And the quarterback had a dislocated shoulder and a broken ankle. All right. So they were at least a couple touchdowns away from even getting in the game. With Harris, the big risk for Democrats, of course, was that she was going to, as an untested quarterback, that she might not be able to lead the team forward. But I think what we've seen over the last 6 weeks is the ability that she's shown to not just unite the team, get everybody on the field on the blue team, but really energize the party as well. So she was able to keep those folks who maybe had strayed, not because they didn't like not because they wanted Donald Trump to win, but because they just were not excited about voting for Biden. So what we've seen then in the last 6 weeks of this election, as you noted, it's a referendum on Trump, is that instead of this being a race where Trump is still able to run as the challenger, as the outsider, she's the incumbent. She is the one who is, making this race a referendum on Trump rather than the other way around. And so what we're seeing overall, can you guys still hear me?
Yep.
Where's that?
Yeah,
okay.
Yep.
Okay. So what we're seeing then is basically with the Democratic side energized and everybody on the field, the Republican side energized, everybody on the field. We've gone from a race where Trump was really basically very, very close to having it sewn up to a race where it's a 50-50 jump ball. If you guys are the types of people, and I'm sure you are because you're sitting in this room on a beautiful evening in September rather than going and doing things that other normal people do.
Right. You
You
summed
are a
it up
political
well.
junkie.
Yeah.
You are a political junkie, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you are probably also the kind of person that may be constantly refreshing certain websites. What are the new polls that are out today? What are the odds of a Harris or a Trump victory today? Click, click, click every minute. And if you are following those, you might notice that there were a whole slew of polls that have been released in the last 24, 48 hours. Some of them seem contradictory. With Harris up maybe 4 or 5 points in Pennsylvania, but tied nationally, or up in Pennsylvania, but losing in Michigan. So you kind of look at this and think, well, gosh, there's too much data. A lot of it isn't making sense. I think the easiest way to think about it then is just to assume that in those races that have been decided in these last 2 elections by 10,000, 20,000, 80,000 votes, that we're back to that. Again, we're back to that reset to where we were back in 2016 and 2020 with the election coming down to a very narrow slice of the electorate. As I said, I think the most impressive thing that the Harris campaign has been able to do is to really make this race one in which she is, more than Trump is, driving the narrative. The biggest benefit, but also biggest liability that Harris had going into this race at the last minute was she wasn't particularly well defined. And if she was defined, it was defined as being part of an administration or being close to and being second in command to an unpopular president. And the theory being that she was going to carry all of that baggage with her into this next phase of the campaign, and that it was going to be impossible. How can you detach yourself from an administration in which you are a part? You are the vice president of the United States. But she's been pretty effective at doing that. When I wrote this morning about the fact that over the course of the last 6 weeks, her approval rating has gone up by a net 15 points. Meanwhile, opinions of Biden are still deeply underwater, and opinions of Trump remain underwater. In fact, they haven't changed over the course of the year, right? People feel the same about him today as they did, not just in July, but in January. And quite frankly, how they felt about him in 2020. So she has been able, as I said, to really grab the reins of this race and keep it as much, keep herself as much as the newcomer as the former president, who is officially the challenger, would like to be able to do. So that leaves us basically in a deadlock where we're looking at, in Pennsylvania, if you want to say, well, what's the pathway here for each candidate to win the election? One, look at where they're spending their money. Look at where they're spending their time. Look at where they're spending their energy. The story today, for example, that is sort of roiling not just Washington, but the very important but small city of Omaha, Nebraska, where Nebraska, of course, like the state of Maine, the two states that give their electoral college votes by the winner of the state. So they delegate their electoral college vote by whoever wins the entire state, but also by each specific district. So, for example, Joe Biden won Nebraska 2 in 2020. Donald Trump won Maine's 2nd congressional district in 2020. It's not a lot of electoral votes, but where you are looking at this very narrow election, even one electoral vote could be the entire story. Republicans are now talking about hosting a special session in the legislature in which they would basically remove that distinction that Nebraska has of awarding votes by congressional district and instead go to a winner-take-all sort of system. Why are they doing that? Well, because for Kamala Harris to win the election, if she won just Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, those 3 states which historically have gone all in the same direction, it's been a rare moment where one state went one way and the other states went to another candidate. If she were to win all of those states and lose everything else, lose Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, she would be at 269 votes. What gets her to 270 is Omaha. If you look at the pathway for Donald Trump, there's a reason that the Harris campaign is spending a great deal of time and money and energy in Georgia and North Carolina. If Donald Trump wins Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, that is 270 electoral votes. There is not a pathway for Kamala Harris. Now, of those, obviously Harris's numbers look the best in Pennsylvania, and it's a state where traditionally Democrats have been more successful than not. But in Georgia, we've had, of those last elections since 2020, Democrats have been on the winning end, at least in national races, both for the Senate and presidential. In North Carolina, though, statewide races at the federal level it's been since 2008 that a Democrat has been successful. And so we can look to the past and say, well, that gives us some sense, but I think we really do have to look at the current reality. And that is that both of those states definitely in play, with, at least if you look at the polling, with Georgia probably being the more challenging of the three for Harris, the more likely for Trump. So that's where I think that I can sort of leave it there for the 30,000-foot view.
That was outstanding. So of the 7 states that are truly battleground states, right? The states that could go either way, that could swing for Trump or for Harris. The Trump electoral firewall is Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia. And then but this congressional district in Nebraska holds the balance, but premised on Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin for Harris.
Correct.
Wow.
Right. Good old Omaha. I mean, pound for pound, it's it's the most influential congressional district in America right now, an electoral vote in America right now.
So one of the things, that's great, Amy. One of the things we've been talking about on campus, in our class, and elsewhere is the change candidate, right? Who is the change candidate? Usually they are a successful candidate. Don't stop thinking about tomorrow, says Bill Clinton, vote your future, all of that imagery. This is such a curious race with a former president, an incumbent vice president, with a very unpopular president, with what, 72% of the country think we're on the wrong track, or whatever that is. So who do you think is the change candidate, and how are they positioning themselves? It seems either through their vice presidents, through their travel schedule, and is that overblown as sort of the desired state to be the change candidate? And I'm getting a phone charger because we don't want to lose. Keep going.
This is,
I'm multitasking.
this is really impressive, by the way. I don't know that any other college presidents
No,
can pull off what you
there
you've
isn't.
pulled off. So
I want to read this in the Cook Political Report.
I can't wait to put this at the top of the
Yeah, lower the banner.
newsletter tomorrow.
No.
Anyway, it is an excellent question, because you're right. Usually, in this era, especially, political scientists will tell you that there's an incumbent penalty. Just being the incumbent, whether it's good times or bad, whether people think that the country's going in the right direction or the wrong direction, this desire for just having something different about, incumbency means status quo, which means that you are part of whatever the bigger sort of zeitgeist is. Your challenge is to try to still seem new and fresh and exciting 4 years later or 8 years later. That's a very difficult thing to be able to do. Now, where Harris benefits from being the change candidate is she's literally like nothing we've ever seen before. Right? We've never had a candidate that looks like Kamala Harris run for president. It also helps that she is about 90 years younger than both of the candidates who were on the ballot before, right? So you have somebody who is, and you hear this a lot from her in both her campaign ads and also in the debate stage. I'm turning the page. This is for a new generation. She's not doing that on accident. She is making the case that we can turn the page away from what we've seen for basically this last 8 years of people feeling frustrated that it's the same voices. There's nobody sort of new at the table. She represents something that is new. Donald Trump, I think, benefited from the fact that he's still seen as a change candidate, but it comes with something that is hardened, right? Opinions about him are hardened. So he may bring change, but it is not really clear either one, whether you think that's going to be good change or bad change. To me, that's really the question mark is, I had this conversation with our pollsters this week because we're going into the field in those swing states this week and asking, who do you think is the candidate of change? Well, that gives you an answer, but it may not fully help you understand what voters mean when they say that. Is it a good change? Right. Is it a bad change? Is she turning the page? Again, is that good or bad? Who's the candidate who's going to basically, as you know, the most important thing for voters is not necessarily just that you're going to be the change candidate, but you're going to be the candidate that looks out for me, that speaks for me. And again, that's why you're seeing the Harris campaign lean so hard into this messaging of Donald Trump looks out for himself. He's about the big people. He's about his rich friends. He's about making his own money. He's not about talking he's not interested in you, and he's not going to look out for you. That's where, again, I think she's been on the offense with that message rather effectively, and certainly in a way that Biden wasn't able to do. Now, but Trump has a pretty good retort to that. I'm the change candidate. I'm turning the page. I'm looking out for you, which he really did not effectively use in the debate. He got to it at minute 84, where he said, "You're Biden. You're basically just Biden." And then in his closing statement, where he said, "You've had 3.5 years to do all the stuff you say you're going to do. Why haven't you done it?" Right? That's the right question to ask somebody who's been in the role of vice president and now says, "I want to do all these big new things." You say, "Well, how come you didn't do it before? Can you really trust that she's going to be able to do something when she's had a chance and she's failed to do it?" But instead, Trump spent most of his time on the debate stage kind of debating himself and the moderators and going off on tangents that really were not effective at undermining her credibility on that issue. And yet, and this is what I keep coming back to, is he's still seen as better on things like the economy or immigration. Who do you think would do a better job on this? And this race is still tied in the states, those 7 states that we talked about, or the firewalls for all of them. So they are deadlocked in part because I think you've got in Donald Trump somebody who voters who had supported him previously have not abandoned. And you have in people who are supporting Harris, voters who probably voted in 2020 for Biden or voted against Donald Trump. The people who are going to decide this race are likely to be the kinds of people who have not been, consistently engaged in elections. So they've come in and out. Maybe they voted in 2022. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they voted in 2016. Maybe they didn't. So those people who are peripherally engaged in elections. And then those cross-pressured voters who we found in our poll tended to be folks who were feeling very squeezed economically. They are very pocketbook conscious because they are telling us that they feel like inflation is actually getting worse, regardless of what the data says. They feel like their day-to-day costs are still a major concern for them. And at the same time, they personally don't like Donald Trump. So they are sort of torn between, and they don't trust Donald Trump just in terms of his temperament and his the way he would comport himself as president. So you can feel that tension there for those undecided voters of like, okay, still kind of like Trump on the economy, but the more I'm reminded of what Trump is like as, you know, how he behaved as president, I don't know if I could go there again.
Really interesting. Let me bring my colleague, Professor Lucas, into this conversation. Professor?
Greetings, Amy. I don't know if you can see me. I actually have two questions, but I'll stick with the presidential one first. And I'm curious if your data, the polls, suggest anything that's going to change. Gives us any insight. If we're deadlocked right now, or are we just waiting till the 6th and see who turns out more votes, or is there something that's going to change? We know the Fed yesterday cut the interest rate, and I have not actually checked my portfolio today, but I'm pretty sure it went up. We know that there is a vice presidential debate in October. We have heard that there's no intent for another presidential debate, but maybe that would change. But is there something we could look, sort of a sign? Are we just waiting for a big TikTok moment, as our students like to say, that's going to change the dynamic, or are the voters looking for something?
That is such a great question. And I just kind of keep coming back to this fact that over the course of the last 6 weeks, we've had some pretty dramatic once-in-a-lifetime things happen. Obviously, we had 2 potential assassination attempts on a presidential candidate. We have had a candidate on the top of the ticket bow out, something none of us have seen in our lifetimes, and especially even those who were alive in 1968 never saw a president bow out this close to an election. And if you think about the last 4 years, the events that have roiled our political environment, former president of the United States being indicted and convicted. We had January 6th. We've had 40-year high inflation. We now have a rate cut. And yet, as I said, 90+% of the people who voted for Trump in 2020 are voting for him again. 90+% of the people who voted for Biden are voting for Harris. So even these very big, really just historic events have done little to shake people from their already calcified partisanship. Now, where we do get into then is, all right, so if the people who are calcified are they're going to vote no matter what. You're never going to change your mind no matter what happens. Now, what you can do is make them more enthusiastic or less enthusiastic. That's where Biden was before the switch, right? Where voters looked at Biden, believed that he was not healthy enough to do this job, or worried he wouldn't make it through a second term, weren't inspired by the thought of another Biden term. They were sitting on the sidelines, and they, it was very real that they would not show up. So that is important, but it's not like they changed their opinion about Donald Trump. They just were feeling less enthusiastic about Biden. So what about these people, though, that aren't wearing a red or a blue jersey? What about the folks that, as you said, are just kind of sitting out there? Maybe they're engaged in this election, but probably just peripherally. What will get them to be engaged? Now, the one thing we do have, since there are 7 battleground states, if you are a person who is registered to vote in one of those battleground states, the odds are that you have been contacted by the campaigns or by some other outside group that is interested in getting you engaged in this election. So the outreach alone to voters, because we are talking about, a universe. It's not that we're having to talk to 160 million people, you're talking probably about 80,000 votes in one state, 75,000 voters in another state. That's not a huge universe of people that can get specifically touched by a campaign or a, nonprofit group or political organization. So I think that's number one, and trying to get those folks to feel as if their vote matters, and whether that's because of something that is important to that specific voter, or because they basically say, this thing that's important to you, this candidate is going to take away, versus this candidate is going to give you the following. The other thing that's really important, and I think Mark understands it better than anybody, being in politics for as long as we both have, is that the voters who right now are not engaged in this election, it's not that they don't care about the country or the issues, it's that it just does not consume them in the way it does for people who are more partisan or more politically engaged. When they start to key in on the election, they are also going to be influenced by where the media attention is at that time. And so you're right, if what we're talking about in the last couple of weeks of the election, if in October there is really just this continued relentless focus on the issue of abortion or the issue of immigration, something happens definitively in one of those areas, that is going to have an impact on that group of voters that is just sort of as I said, watching elections sort of out of the corner of their eye. But if you are at any campaign right now, you're trying to find any one of those voters that is potentially on the fence, and you've probably been communicating with them in as many possible ways.
It's a great analysis. Well, we have a great group here and would like to open up the audience to some student questions. We have a roving mic, thanks to our HWS friends. If you just raise your hand, why don't we go right back there to the room? We got a microphone coming at you. Amy from
I think you should just put them on speakerphone.
I know.
Have them do that. Or text me a question.
I know.
I'll text you back.
We're going to use all forms of media here.
That's what I mean. It would be great. Just emojis. Ask me a question via emojis, and I'll answer you via emoji.
Hi, Amy. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
awesome. Hi, my name's Ella. I'm a first year here. I'm initially from Massachusetts, but obviously I've relocated up to upstate New York now. So my question is that 538 has long been a touchstone for political junkies to reference and see a recap of polling, but recently they've come under fire after showing that Biden had a real chance and was even leading, despite consistent sentiment and polling showing he was trailing Trump. I know you referenced 538 in your most recent article titled "Look at the Trends, Not at the Top Lines." What's your current take on 538's most recent prediction that shows Harris with a 61 to 39 chance of winning in November? And do you have any comments on 538's methodology that they use?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because I just started, let me open my, I can't remember exactly how I said this, but I think I opened my column this week, saying, if you really want to drive yourself insane for the next 40 days, tether yourself to the latest prediction models for the outcome of the presidential election. Because you will make yourself insane by putting, your emotions directly and tying your emotions about this election directly onto prediction models, whether it's 538 or whether it is Nate Silver or whether it is Decision Desk. There are many people out there building these models. As a good liberal arts graduate, I will tell you that I was never really into the math piece of the liberal arts. I really stuck to the other side. So it is not for me to, first of all, I do not have the expertise to understand how to build or how to to analyze, criticize anybody's prediction model. It's not what we do at the political report. But I have nothing bad to say about anybody who does that. I think the challenge in having a predictive model is that it gives folks a false sense of security, or it leads people to conclude a certain amount of certainty, that believe that there's certainty in politics. If I told you there's an 85% chance that it was going to rain, you would bring your umbrella and you would almost certainly cancel all your plans that involved being outside. If it didn't rain, you're really upset about that. But bottom line, the forecasters would say, well, if there was a 15%, I told you there's a 15% chance it wouldn't rain. But most of us don't think in that way. So as such, I think what 538 does do very well, and the Nate Silvers and others, is provides us the tools, which is puts all of the polling in one place. They are able to, and we are doing this on the Cook Political Report site as well, with polls that we feel are transparent, have a good track record, just at the national level, and be able to, it's not just averaging them, but ensuring that it's a rolling average. In other words, that the old polls are not impacting the average. So the most recent polls are up front. And I think what that gives, the most important thing you can look for then are the trends. Where is this race headed? Rather than where do we think it will end up? Where has this race been and where is it now? And that's why I do think that, as I said, looking at Harris's change in approval ratings has been the most significant trend line in these last 6 weeks, because this was supposed to be an election, if you're the Trump campaign, that was going to be all about making it a referendum on Harris's inability to do the job of president, and right now he's and to basically make her as unpopular as Biden. He's not been able to do that. So the bottom line, I don't have any. I've not weighed in on the model wars. But I do think that what 538 does provide to us as a service, which again is free for all of us, and I wouldn't want to have to do this by hand myself, is compiling all of the polling data out there in a way that is easy to access.
Great question. Other questions here from the audience? We have, raise your hand. Yeah, right here.
Hello. My name's Noah. So how accurate do you feel about polling that's currently being done with President or former President Trump typically underpolling and people that are like secret voters?
Yeah. This is a really great question. The one thing, first let me address the sort of shy voter or the secret Trump voter. I think what we've learned, I mean, the nice thing about the fact that we've had Trump on the ballot now, this will be the third time, is every election you sort of learn something new. And I don't think there ever was really a shy voter. I think there are Trump voters that just are very hard to find. And here's why. If you think about the kinds of voters that are supporters of Donald Trump, many of them are people who are not your consistent voters. They aren't the kinds of people who vote in every single election. And as such, they just aren't as active in sort of the, they're not on the places where you would go, say you're a campaign and you go to the voter file and you're looking at who are the kinds of people who are going to show up and vote. The first thing you're going to look at is, well, how often have they voted? Because the most important predictor for somebody voting is that they've already voted. But Trump's success in 2016 and in 2020 is pulling people in who haven't necessarily been consistent voters. Those people are hard to find. And as a pollster, you're also really nervous about putting people into your model who say either, one, I'm not going to vote, right? If you do contact them and they say, no, I'm not interested in the election, or if you're going off a voter file and these are people who haven't really voted consistently, you may make an assumption that they're not going to be active in this election. The other theory of why the polls were off in 2020 is that the kinds of people who are attracted to voting for Donald Trump are the very people who would be the least receptive to answering questions from somebody who reached out to them from, say, a polling institution, whether it's the New York Times or whether it's Gallup or whoever it is. These are folks who have a lower social trust, and as such, they are going to be harder to get into a survey, into a focus group, not because they feel embarrassed about voting for Donald Trump or they don't want to tell anyone they're voting for Donald Trump, but because they don't believe in this whole process altogether. They don't want to be part of it in the same way. So do I worry that the polls are missing stuff? Absolutely. And every pollster worth their salt is worried about this as well, that we are doing, and not we, but the people who do polling have been, and the folks who are invested in this craft every 2 years go and do really big audits on what worked and what didn't, and are trying to make it as accurate as possible. But the bottom line, and I'll just leave it at this, which is, given what I just said about that Pew study showing 90+% of Trump voters voting for Trump and Biden voters voting for Harris, we now have an electorate that's more calcified than ever. When we think about what polls were really produced to do, was to show shifts in the electorate, right? That big events, how did they impact the way people saw a certain issue or a certain candidate? Now we have, such a calcified electorate that it's not just that big events don't change people's perceptions of the candidates, but that trying to find that movement is hard, right? If you're seeing just a shift of 2 points or 3 points, that's not possible in the way that polling actually works. So what we really need is the equivalent of like a micron microscope, one of those high-powered microscopes for polling. But what we have instead is a magnifying glass. And so we just have to accept the fact that what polls can and can't tell us is limited. And it's especially limited when the vote is going to come down to a shift of 1 to 3 points.
Let's hear it for the
And that goes both ways, by the way. The other fear from pollsters right now is that after 2 cycles of underestimating Trump, that what happens if it goes the other way, that people underestimated the Harris vote.
Right.
And that it doesn't look as close as it is today because she's able to turn out people that maybe haven't been as easy to reach, especially if we're talking about younger voters, right, and the challenge of trying to reach younger voters for surveys.
We have another student question here. Sophia.
Hi, my name is Sophia. I'm a senior here at HWS. I kind of wanted to ask a question about something that you mentioned in your overview of the race, where you said that the Harris reset, the power of the Harris reset is that she can bring some excitement to the race to those who may have voted for Biden in 2020 but kind of strayed since then. I was wondering, something that was mentioned in the presidential debate was that Harris has moderated her views a bit since 2020, especially on environmental policy and Medicare for all. And I was wondering if playing to the middle might take away from the excitement, not that being moderate and being exciting are mutually exclusive, though I'm skeptical a bit. So I was wondering if you think playing to the middle is a winning strategy in this case, where it might come down to who can excite people the most.
Yes, I had a little trouble hearing this, but is the question, is she able, by moderating herself, she may not be able to excite
Yeah.
voters, or that's the question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
That she went, she's moved so far to the center that people who might have been excited about a progressive candidate are now like, she's not so progressive. Okay. Yeah, I do wonder, if part of the reason we are not seeing younger voters rally around Harris in the same way we saw younger voters rally around, well, even around Biden, but certainly around somebody like Barack Obama, is that there is a disconnect now between younger voters and their expectations for elected officials, especially those who are coming at politics from a more liberal perspective. And look, if you are a younger voter, so anybody who's been a quote unquote young voter since the 2016 election, so that's people, now if you were first able to vote in 2016, you're not, I guess you're still young, but you're not a brand new voter. But let's just say you're still count as the younger voter. In 2016, a lot of those voters were super excited about Bernie Sanders, and they were told voters under 30 were powering the Bernie Sanders movement. He loses the primary, and those voters were basically told, look, I know you're not excited about Hillary Clinton, but you kind of have to be because Donald Trump is this terrible threat, and you should show up and vote for him and vote for her. 2020, who were voters excited about, who were younger voters in 2020? Elizabeth Warren and, once again, Bernie Sanders. Once again, Democratic. The overall Democratic electorate put Joe Biden as the nominee, and younger voters, once again, were told, okay, I know you're not really that into him, but you got to vote for him because Donald Trump's an existential threat. Now, this is the third election where it's a candidate who ostensibly came from the left, but really, if you kind of look at what her politics were when she was in California, she was also criticized a lot on the left. And she moved to the left in the primary for president, and since then has been sort of disavowing a lot of those positions. And so I get, if you're a voter coming from the left or who was really excited about the prospect of somebody like a Bernie Sanders type candidate being the standard bearer for the party, that you're once again disappointed that that person is not there. But I do think that, we talk a lot about what's going to happen to the Republican Party post-Trump. There's going to be a lot of conversation, too, about what happens to the Democratic Party post-Trump, because so much of what has motivated voters in the Trump era is their but also their deep dislike. If you like him or you don't like him, that's driving the vote. He is the single most consequential figure in our politics, and it has really driven where the Democratic Party has gone in terms of picking candidates, because they're picked in many ways to be the one who could be able to, we got to put our feelings aside. We got to put some of our frustrations aside. It's all about finding somebody who's the best candidate to beat Donald Trump. So what does that look like when he's not in the picture anymore? And where do these younger voters who are becoming a bigger and bigger slice of the electorate, where do they expect out of the next candidate for president? And that's where, the 2028 election, I know that sounds like a long way away, but that becomes, to me, one of the more fascinating primaries, because if Harris is not on the ticket, because you've got a party that also needs to find its identity in a world without Donald Trump.
Well, we are at time, I'm afraid. Amy, I can't thank you enough. This was a great conversation. Did you have one more question? Do you have time for one question? We have a very
Sure.
It's a short one.
Perfect. My name is Jack. I'm a sophomore here, and my one question is, I'm curious as to your predictions for the upcoming House and Senate elections.
Perfect. Great question.
So the question was
The House and Senate.
I'm sorry, Mark, can you say it?
Yeah,
again?
predictions for House and Senate.
The Senate.
Yeah.
Yeah, great question. The Senate is an easier one, which is the map and the math have been a problem for Democrats from the very beginning. In order to hold the Senate, it means they need to hold on to the 8 really competitive states that they're defending this year, including red states like West Virginia, Montana, and Ohio. Right now, the single most consequential race in the country deciding who will be in the majority is in Montana, where right now polling clearly showing that John Tester, who has been holding on to a tough state for years, he was first elected in 2006, but the state itself, it's not just that the state is redder. Donald Trump will do better there in 2024 than, say, a Mitt Romney did in 2012 when he was last on the ballot in a presidential year. But it's that, our polarized politics means that these parochial candidates, candidates who are able to buck the national tide because voters in that state say, well, I may not like Republicans, I may not like Democrats, but I like my Democrat, I like my Republican. There are fewer and fewer of those types of voters. And so the hill that Tester has to climb is steeper than ever, and he's running against probably his strongest opponent and best funded opponent since he first won. So if you put that race into the Republican column, and West Virginia, that's a 51-49 Senate. So regardless of who wins the presidency, it's a Republican Senate. I think Democrats have done a good job of holding their own in places like Ohio, which is still going to be a tough climb. But more importantly, in terms of just the overall number of seats that Republicans could pick up, I think Democrats have been running very strong in those swing states like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Nevada and Arizona and Wisconsin. So a 51 or 52 seat Senate is, for Republican Senate, is sort of the safe bet right now. The House is an absolute toss-up. This is my first love. I started covering the House when I started covering politics. I find it much more interesting than any other body to cover. So I love that it's as close to a toss-up as possible. The state of New York is going to be a very important state in determining control of the House. What we're noticing is, the good news if you're Democrats is that having Harris on the top of the ticket keeps momentum and energy up from the base that was not there for Biden. So that's very helpful. But in looking at blue states like California and New York, especially in places like the Central Valley of California, which has a significant Latino population, or looking at Long Island here in New York, which has been kind of on the is a purplish place. Harris is not running as strongly as Biden did in 2020. It's not to say she's going to lose those places, but the wind behind their backs that I think some Democrats had hoped they were going to get in New York may not be as strong. And I think a lot of the Republican incumbents in New York are doing what they need to do. It may not be enough, but they're positioning themselves well and running strong campaigns. So at the end of the day, where the presidential race goes is likely to tell us where the House race, control of the House will go. But I think you should expect that, one, we're probably not going to get to call control of the House for a few days because California, Oregon, Washington, those are three big states for key House races. They all have significant vote by mail process. And so that takes a while to kind of get through. But I think the more likely scenario, it's, if Harris wins, it's a Harris with a Republican Senate and a Democratic House. If Trump were to win, then you would have most likely scenario being a Republican House and Senate and obviously a White House.
Well, Amy, I'm so glad we took that question. Thank you, Jack, for the question.
Yes,
You're
you.
so nice to give us this time. I can't help but notice the wonderful photograph of our valued friend Gwen Eiffel right behind you. She is an honorary degree recipient here at Hobart and William Smith. So we are attached as well through Gwen. But significantly, we're grateful to you for taking time
Thank you.
out of your afternoon. I'm grateful to, let's give it up.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm grateful to my phone and my charger. I've self-doxed myself tonight with my, but today is my birthday. So if you'd like to text me your my birthday greeting, just saying, you have my number. But join us again when we have John King in October and LaTosha Brown and Hugh Hewitt and some others yet to be finalized dates. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Amy.